Hello, and welcome to the Badger Talks podcast, the podcast that shares interviews with experts from the University of Wisconsin-Madison community about their work, research, and a little bit about what they're like as people, too. I'm your host, Buzz Kemper. Today we're talking about the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald, and I'm happy to have as my guest Steve Ackerman, Emeritus Vice Chancellor for Research and Graduate Education at UW-Madison. Do you go by Steve or Steven?
Yep, Steve.
Steve.
Good.
Steve Ackerman, Emeritus Vice Chancellor for Research and Graduate Education. I'm getting used to long titles when it comes to UW folks. Welcome to the show and thank you.
Thanks. It's great to be here. And long titles get a little suspicious too, I think. Right?
Yeah, right.
Like you're trying to make yourself sound really important.
Right. The sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald, a lot of people, including myself, our entire scope of knowledge is contained in the Gordon Lightfoot song, which you told me earlier is fairly accurate, with a couple of, you said there are a couple of errors. And can you tell me what in the song is not accurate?
So there are a couple of things, and by the way, it is a great song.
It is a great song.
Really interesting.
Yeah.
And it is, as you're saying, as you're pointing out, relatively accurate. Generally, the errors that he makes are really, I would say, artistic license.
Okay.
Like he says, they're going to Cleveland. Well, they're not going to Cleveland. They're going to Detroit to make automobiles.
Right.
That's where they're taking that iron ore.
Yeah.
So there are errors like that. Gucci-gami, the lake is known as Gitchigami. It's not called Gucci-gami.
Yeah, I think he says Gitchigumi.
He says Gitchigumi, and it's called Gitchigami.
Interesting.
Yeah, but Longfellow used Gitchigumi in his Hiawatha
of
poem.
course.
And so that's why he used that same thing.
Okay.
But otherwise, it's pretty accurate. The other aspects that aren't accurate is the song gives you the impression that they knew they were really in trouble.
Oh, yeah.
And they really didn't. They knew they were in trouble. They had reported they had two fence rails down, a fence rail down, radar out. And so they were in communication, the Fitzgerald captain, with other ships, the Anderson in particular,
Right.
which was traveling with them.
Yeah.
But the fact that they went down in 5 minutes, they really had no idea of the threats that they were in.
Yeah, and I read that the captain's last message, I bet you know it word for word, but it was something like, "We are holding our own, moving along like an old shoe," or something like an old shoe. What was it?
It was the one that I know of is we were moving that we're holding our own because there was another ship that passed by them, and they had some communications, and then they asked. So how you doing with your troubles? And David said, we're holding our own. And then a squall comes in, visibility goes out. The Anderson, which is tracking them on a radar, can't see them anymore. And then all of a sudden, the squall line goes by, visibility is great. And within 5 minutes, the Fitzgerald is completely gone.
Yeah. Wow. Well, let's get to some of the more like statistical stuff about it. So first of all, the ship was originally built, I think, in the 50s, right?
Yep. It was launched in 1958. What amazes me, one of the things that amazes me about the ship is when they had that launch, 10,000 people showed up to see the launching.
Of a cargo ship.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, that's how big it was because it was the biggest boat on the Great Lakes. Up until, I think, up until 72, maybe. So a long time. It broke all kinds of shipping records. Even on the voyage where it sank, it was carrying enough talconite pellets to make 7,500 automobiles. And that's just one trip that it made that year.
Yeah.
And this was 1975 automobiles.
Okay.
So you can imagine how heavy, remember, you probably had an automobile from the 70s. They're a lot heavier than they are today.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, there was a lot of steel.
There was a lot of steel.
Yeah, in those things. So it's, some people call it the cargo that was aboard the ship, and I think it was 26,000 tons?
Yep, 26,000 tons of talconite pellets.
Taconite pellets.
Yeah.
Are taconite and iron ore interchangeable terms, or is there a difference? Because I hear people say both.
Yeah, it's pretty much, I look at them as the same. How taconite pellets are made is that they take the ore that has the iron in it, they crush it all up, they take magnets in and then pull the iron out, and then take that iron and mix it with some other material in order to solidify it and make it into little balls that then roll.
I was wondering that as well. Like, is it the size of a BB or the size of a marble or the size of a softball? I mean, what is it?
It's the size of a peewee marble.
Okay.
So a large ball bearing, essentially.
Okay.
Yeah. And, one of the reasons why they did it is again, easy to ship it. So when they're loading the ore into the Fitzgerald or other ships, they basically roll them down a chute into cargo bays.
Okay.
And that's how they fill the shit up.
I was going to ask that. Like, why not bars, like gold bars, or why not some other shape? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And the pellets make it easier to load the ship.
Okay.
Of course, the other potential problem, or what I think is the problem and what some of the analysis of the shipwreck indicated, is that once they start to roll, now in the ship, they can roll.
Yeah, of course.
And so what happens is during the storm, water is getting into those cargo bays. And as the water gets into those cargo bays, it's filling the spaces between those marbles.
Yeah.
So it's much like, I make the analogy to sand. If you have a pile of sand,
yeah,
you can pour water on it, and that water's not coming out.
Right.
It's just filling the empty spaces.
Right.
And that's why, as the song goes, and as the Fitzgerald reported, they had their pumps going because they were listing, so they were tilting.
Yeah.
So they knew they were taking on water. They were running their pumps, but if it's going into the cargo bay, the pumps aren't getting anything out.
Right.
And so as the boat gets heavier and heavier, it sinks lower and lower in the water. And then if it runs into a wave and slows down, or if a big wave comes and picks up the rear, those talconite pellets roll to the bow. And they break through some of the cargo holes, get into the bow, the ship breaks in half, and down it goes. And that's how it sinks in 5 minutes.
Wow. I'm really glad you said that. That is very clarifying, because one of the things that is fascinating to me is the physics involved in a large ship sinking, and we most commonly think of the Titanic, about how it starts to lift up out of the water, either the back end or the front end, because one end gets filled with water, and at a certain angle, the structure can no longer support the weight, so the thing just breaks in half.
Yeah.
Is that what happened here?
Yeah.
Okay.
And in fact, when they looked at the, some of the surveys after the accident, basically the front part of the boat, the bow, which is about a third of the ship, you can see from the bow, it's sitting on its on the bottom, so you can see the deck and everything. And you can see the bow is damaged, so it was pretty clear it nosedived into the lake. The stern is actually upside down and laying on the bottom. And the two of those together make up about 2/3 of the length of the ship.
Okay.
So there's another whole third of the ship that just got disintegrated.
So has someone actually dived down? Because it's like 500 feet down.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So not a diver themselves, but they've taken, like Jacques Cousteau is going down there with those bells to look.
Okay, like robots. Basically.
And they send robots down as well. Yeah. And the other thing is that when they looked at that, what they could see is that the talconite pellets were spread over a larger area. And when you do the calculations, that makes you realize, the ship broke up on the surface, and then the talconite pellets and other debris fell down, and that's how they knew that it broke on the surface. And that's why it went down so quick, because it broke so rapidly. Unlike the Titanic, where it took a long time
took
before
hours.
it could.
That's really interesting. So with that last broadcast from the captain, And then 10 minutes later, I think other ships were saying we no longer have them on our radar. So it was just unbelievably quick that the thing went down. So it must have been the just sheer terror of that. I just can't imagine.
Yeah, and I think, well, when you look at the exchanges and the recordings from the Anderson, which was the ship that was traveling with the Fitzgerald, so they had agreed to travel together because the weather they knew was going to be bad. And so he was just saying he couldn't believe that he had him on his radar, and then 5 minutes later, it's not there.
It's not there.
And again, these are 1975 radars. So when that squall line came through, that radar just couldn't penetrate the precipitation that was happening. And so they, kind of like, all right, we have bad weather storm in here. We'll see the Fitzgerald in another minute or so. And then it's not there.
Yeah. And speaking of the Anderson, what does traveling together mean? Does that mean they're 200 feet apart? They're 2 miles apart? What generally, what would they consider traveling together?
So when the Fitzgerald went down, the Anderson was about 10 miles behind.
10 miles?
Yeah.
Okay, that is farther than I might have thought. Yeah. Okay, interesting.
And there may have been other times when they were closer. I mean, they left Duluth pretty close to the same amount of time. They were in radio contact. They knew the weather was going to be bad. So they said, hey, how about we travel together, which was not uncommon for them together. Why not, right?
Yeah.
And in fact, what ended up happening was when the forecast of the storm came up and reached the ships, because they were getting them on telegraphs, they realized, at some point the wind, when it's really severe, is going to be coming out of the northwest.
Right.
So rather than staying to the south of Lake Superior, they talked about changing their route, and they did. And so they went further north along the Canadian border, and that provided some shielding from the winds.
Okay, so that was beneficial, just not beneficial enough.
And the forecast was off. So by that time they made the decision.
That is exactly what I would like to know next is when you said they knew the weather was bad, they could not possibly have known how bad, because I would think that there is a point at which you say, we just can't depart on the day we want to.
Right.
But the forecast then underpredicted what was really going to happen.
Yeah, so we knew in 1975 the weather forecasts have gotten pretty good. We knew that there's a certain area in the panhandle of Oklahoma that generates these winter storms, which we call mid-latitude cyclones. When they left on November 9th from Duluth, it was a beautiful day. And so the forecast was, this thing's going to develop, but these are very seasoned captains, right? So they've been on 20-foot seas, or 20-foot, I say seas, but really lake waves. So, they knew it. It's the end of the season, right? Let's get that one more roll in there. And so they were paying attention to the forecast, but, again, they didn't suspect the severity. And then when they made that course change, when the next model run came out, rather than those winds coming from the northwest, the system had developed quicker than the models. And so the wind was coming out of instead of the winds coming out of the northeast, it was coming out of the northwest. And so when the severeness of the storm got to its severest, the wind is running the full length of Lake Superior, which means you now have a big fetch, strong winds, you can generate 15-foot waves. 20-foot waves were observed on the lake.
Well, and what I read was that there were rogue waves, they call them, up to 35 feet.
Yeah. So some people reported 35 feet. That's one of those things where, did it really get to 35 feet?
Did it really get to 35 feet? Right.
So,
I mean, it could be like a fish story.
It could be. I'm not saying that it is, but there were enough observations and theoretical simulations, back in the 90s now to go back and look at the situations that could say, there's no doubt there were 20-foot waves. Now, could them get together at 30? It's possible. But, a 20-foot wave. I mean, think about a 20-foot wave.
Oh yeah, I mean that's
amazing.
Beyond daunting.
On a lake.
On a lake. It is absolutely daunting. Did the captain
McSorley?
Did he as far as we know from the records, it seems to me that he did everything right and that the situation was just beyond human control. Is that your assessment is right? There was no pilot error?
There was no pilot error. Okay. I mean, the ship was listing, and though they have their pumps on trying to get the water out, I think what they clearly don't know is that the water is getting into the cargo holds.
Right.
And when it does that, it makes the boat heavier and heavier and heavier. And one of the things McSorley said, and again, this is a very seasoned Great Lakes captain, was that these are the roughest seas he's ever experienced.
Right.
So if you're taking on water and getting lower and lower, the waves are going to look bigger and bigger as well. Yeah. And other captains, recognize these are 20-foot waves. He's the only one that I've seen, and there's all the stuff that I read that said, these are the roughest seas I've ever been in.
Right.
And I think part of it is he was taking on that water.
Yeah.
But they had, unlike the song implied, they knew they were in problems and they were having issues, but they were holding their own.
Yeah. Right. I mean, right. We are holding our own. Yeah. Now, from your last answer, I have two questions. One is a very quick one, but we use the term seas. Most people tend to think of that as referring to oceans, but the captain did say these are the roughest seas I've ever experienced. So I'm led to believe then in maritime world that the word seas simply refers to a body of water on which you can sail a boat.
Yeah, and I think the condition of that water.
Oh, the condition. Okay. Yeah, okay. That is good to know.
Yeah, and I remember because I grew up on Long Island, so used to ocean stuff. I had no idea. So when it went down in 1975, I was a senior studying physics and meteorology in a college in Oneonta, and I was amazed by the fact that a weather could take down such a big ship,
right?
And the physics of that. How do you take down a ship like that in 5 minutes? I mean, it's just. And it wasn't until I actually came to Wisconsin and stood on the shores of the Great Lakes that I realized, these are like seas. These are not. These are Great Lakes, just like the word describes them.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And I actually spoke recently with Moira Harrington about the Great Lakes, in general, and I learned all kinds of things about these amazing bodies of water. The other thing that I was going to follow up on is you talked about the additional weight caused by the water coming in and filling those spaces between the little taconite balls. How does that affect the sinking of the ship? In other words, what do you think would have happened if this is a fair question for you? I know you're not a physicist, but how do you think the ship would have responded had it been empty and encountered the same storm, the same waves, and been empty? Would that have made it better or worse?
Oh, I think it would have made it definitely better.
Better,
because it would have been
intuitively.
It would have been higher up on the surface. Again, it would have been rough seas. But they wouldn't have had that problem. I think, for one thing, if they did have cracks of water was getting in, the pumps would have been able to take it out.
Right.
So it would have been
right.
Not
if water
fun,
is in a space that is open, if water was starting to fill this room that we are in, we could have a pump pumping it out. But if it's between, if it's filling in little cracks between iron ore balls, then I would think there's no way a pump can deal with that.
Right.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. That's the interesting part.
Yeah. No
and the
kidding.
questions that come up is how did the water get in there? And there's been a number of theories. We don't really know.
Oh, it's not just waves crashing over the bow and then getting into everything?
So that was one of the theories of the Marine National Transportation Board that investigated it. As we were talking about, you load those marbles down into the cargo bays, and then they put these 7-ton hatches on, and then they secure 68 special clamps.
Wow. Okay.
So one of the theories is that the water was getting into those hatch covers.
Okay.
There's no evidence of that. The families did not like that conclusion because the implication is that the sailors on board, it was their fault. And there's no evidence of it.
Right.
They don't like it.
Yeah.
But it's in Gordon Lightfoot's song, right? The hatchways caved in. It was then he said, fellas, it's been good to know you.
Yeah.
Out of respect for the families, in 2010, Gordon Lightfoot changed the words to that song. So he no longer says when the hatchways caved in.
It's at something a certain time, like at 7 p.m. The main hatchway caved in. Yeah. So the new lyric. At 7 p.m. it grew dark, and he said, "Fellas, it's been good to know ya." So that it takes the blame off of the sailors. Although I would think the main hatchway caving in could be just due to the force of water and be no one's fault. But
and that's one of those, again, where it's artistic license. Because there's no evidence that the hatchways actually caved in.
Oh, I see.
What the initial report was thinking was that the water was getting in through hatchways that were not completely sealed.
Oh, I see. Right. And that would be a human error.
And that would be classified as a human error.
That is really interesting. The history of the boat is so. Here's a little fun fact that I found out, and maybe you can elaborate a little bit on this. But the former captain, a guy by the name of Peter Pulser, was known as the DJ captain. When he got close to land or going up a narrow waterway, he would pipe music out of the sound system and sometimes even tell people about the boat as he went through. Do you know anything about that?
I did not know that. No.
Yeah, the DJ captain. I thought that was really.
Yeah. Oh, that's really interesting. So he's probably talking about, again, it was the biggest ship on Great Lakes for many years. So he's probably just bragging
really
about
it. And he would brag about it through the PA system as he passed people on the shoreline. I think that's just absolutely wonderful. All right, just two more things. First of all, I just want to ask, is there anything about the ship or the sinking that you would like people to know, but I didn't ask the right question for?
No, I think the only other thing that's sort of related to it is that, as I mentioned, the 1940 Armistice Day storm was almost exactly the same.
Right.
60 people died, 5 ships went down because they had no clue this weather storm was coming.
Yeah.
In 75, we knew it was coming. The forecast wasn't as accurate. Little decisions made led to the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald. In 1998, pretty much exactly the same song hits the Great Lakes regions.
Same storm.
Same type of storm.
Yeah.
Follows the same path, and nobody dies because weather forecasting has gotten that better.
Because now we've gotten to those details. Good. So the first one was 1940. 1940. Then 1975. So that's 35 years. And then another 35 years would have brought us to 2010. So the next one
is pretty close.
So this isn't a predictable thing. It's not like, we can expect this every X amount of years.
No, we can't expect it every 30 years.
Okay.
But we can forecast it a lot better.
Right.
I mean, they originate on the panhandles of Oklahoma, so we can see that developing and then know the path that it's going to take and give people plenty of time.
Okay, terrific.
To prepare for it.
Wow, just amazing stuff. And so the last thing I want to ask you, Steve Ackerman, is what do you do? What do you do when you're not studying meteorology and the history of the Edmund Fitzgerald? What is your outside of work life like?
So in the wintertime, I curl. So Madison is a hotbed of curlers, and so I do that 3 or 4 times a day.
Oh, you're my first curler guest.
Yeah. It's a blast. It's a great friendly sport, very competitive, but when the game's over, the game's over. So you sit around and have a drink. And
there you go.
Celebrate.
Yeah.
And then in the summertime, I have currently I have a wooden rowboat that I am restoring.
Wow.
That I started to do, and then COVID hit, and then I just got too busy. But now I'm doing that again.
Restore in the sense of what? It's like an antique and needs.
It's a really nice wooden boat. I think it was built in Massachusetts in the early 70s.
Okay.
So it's a nice one, and I just had it for 15 years, and I just let it deteriorate, and it got some wood rot, and now I'm fixing all those things.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, we know that the Edmund Fitzgerald was named for the president and CEO of Northwestern Mutual Insurance Company. What does your boat have a name? I bet you didn't name it after a CEO of an insurance company.
No, but when you have a good point here, and I think once I get it done and get it out of the garage, I think I'll name it after Ann Pryor, my wife.
Okay, excellent. That is.
I know it's a little annoying to her right now.
Oh well, yeah, probably. But I think that's a better idea than the insurance company. That's terrific. Steve Ackerman, wow, this has really been a fascinating conversation. I wish we could do another hour, but thank you so much for being on the program.
It was great here. I really like what you're doing. I love your shows, and happy to talk about weather and the Fitzgerald.
You've been listening to the Badger Talks podcast. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Steve Ackerman. Please browse our previous episodes for other topics that may be of interest to you. The Badger Talks podcast is a creation of UW Connects and produced at Audio for the Arts Recording Studios in Madison, Wisconsin. Our music is composed by Bill Purdy and performed by the UW Marching Band. I'm Buzz Kemper. Thank you for listening.